So, how do you go about putting a 3D feature onto your monster? If you're wanting to add something that is going to be stuffed of its own onto your design, you need to make sure that you have got yourself some thread and a needle in an appropriate colour for the fabric you're going to be working on, a pot of pins, a pair of scissors, some stuffing, and you are also going to have the shape that you are wanting to have. In this case here, you can see I'm going to be adding an eye to my monster that I've already drawn. What I have done is I have previously traced the eye that I'm wanting onto a piece of paper, and this time, instead of adding a seam allowance, which is 1.5 centimetres, I am going to be doubling the size of my monster to make it twice as big as it's going to be in the end. Once you have cut that shape out, ready to go, you need to add any additional features onto it. So in this case, you can see I have already added my pupil using the same running stitch method that I used to attach my shapes directly onto my monster. The next thing that I am going to do, I'm going to take this shape and I'm going to produce a small neat running stitch all the way around the outside of this shape. So remember, when you thread your needle up, double your thread up so that your tails of your thread are the exact same length. To tie a knot, you create a loop and pop those tails through the loop and give yourself a nice secure knot. What you are going to do when you start, remember we always start on the back of the piece. So in this case, the back is the side that I cannot see the pupil on. If my knot comes out, I'm going to take my needle back through to the other side, allow my needle to go through the middle of those two threads that I am currently using, and pull to create a really secure, neat loop on the back of my work. When you pull on this, this should not be able to pull out. Now what you are going to do, you are going to create a running stitch all the way around the outside of this shape. So remember, the same as we learned in a previous video, you are going to be going in and out. The way to remember where you're going when you're doing this is if you have just come up, you are next going to go down, and if you have just gone down, the next step you are going to do is up. You will notice while I'm doing this, I'm working really close to the edge of my fabric. I want to keep as much of that main green body of my eye loose as I possibly can. And I'm making sure that my stitches as before as a running stitch are uniformed. So to do that, I'm making sure that the stitch and the gap in between are approximately the same size. If your shape starts pulling in like it is doing here, don't worry about that at the moment, because later on we're going to use that method to make this into the right shape. If you start running out of thread, again, don't worry if your fabric starts pulling up slightly. So I'm coming back towards the end of my stitches now. I need to make sure that my very last stitch is the same distance away from my first stitch as all the rest of my running stitches have been. So I should have something that looks like this, and on the other side is slightly pulling itself in. Keep this thread attached, don't cut anything just yet, and you are going to take some of your wadding. Now this is going to be a polyester fibre, so this is going to be nice and lightweight, and it's going to be really soft and squishy. You're going to place this inside your shape. If, like me, you've taken more than you thought was expected, just take some of it off and hold this down. What you're going to do now, you're going to take your thread, and if you pull this, you can see that the shape closes in around that polyester filling. And you should be able to pull on that nice and tightly and pack that stuffing in as best you can into that shape, so that your back should look something like this when you're pulling it tight. If you can hold the thread and the fabric together, you are now going to create a very small set of stitches that are going to secure this off to be able to finish your design. So the same as we did when we were sewing our first shapes onto our monster, we're going to do one, we're going to do a second one, and then we are going to do a third one. And this makes this shape nice and secure so that I can let go of it and it stays the shape that I'm wanting it to be. When I flip it over, I should have something that looks like this with my eye in the middle. My pupil then is centered onto the eye that I am going for, and on the back I've got a little gap with my stitches nice and secure. Again, I've not cut this thread. You can then place this onto your monster exactly where you're wanting your 3D eye to be, and you are very carefully going to be stitching round on the back of that eyeball right the way through onto the wrong side of the fabric. To be able to do this, you can push the needle in and back out again, checking that this has securely caught the eye but not come through to the front. And you can securely stitch that eye on all the way around the outside of that stuffed shape. Keeping the piece of thread the same piece of thread has the benefit that it means your eye is not going to come undone once you have got it attached to your monster. On this reverse, you can finish off this piece of stitching the same as we have done before. So in the middle of the shape, you are going to do 1 stitch, 2 stitches, and 3 stitches. And then we can cut off and remove the needle and thread, leaving you with a nice 3D eye on your monster. You'll notice I've got a little bump here. That's perfectly okay at the moment because later on I'm going to be sewing this and it will be making this nice and flat as well.